What are fats broken down to, and how does our body digest them? What about proteins? Our body needs to break those down too. Hey everyone, we're going to continue on today with speaking about macro and micronutrients that we would need for life. We're going to talk now about fats, proteins, nucleic acids, and vitamins and minerals. So lipids or fats are a very diverse group of macromolecules that are insoluble in water, so they float on water. This is a property that they all have in common, whether or not they're solid fats, liquid fats. This is a very important property that they have. So lipids, compared to proteins and carbohydrates, store double the amount of energy of any other biological molecule. So carbohydrates and proteins have roughly 4 calories per gram, where lipids have about 9 calories per gram. So it's a much more nutrient or calorically dense nutrient. Lipids are, when they're on our cell membrane, are called phospholipids. So this is an important, this is why that insolubility in water is important, because they'll form a barrier to water entering the cell without need. So they can maintain their structural integrity of a cell membrane even in the presence of water. Lipids at the base of the skin provide insulation. And lipids and fats also cushion our internal organs. So we need roughly 4% body fat at minimum to protect our internal organs from injury. Lipids are also involved in the synthesis or creation of certain hormones like estrogen. And some vitamins are fat soluble. So vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat soluble. So if you don't ingest them while you're ingesting fat, our body isn't able to absorb them. So many lipids are composed of 2 structural components, glycerol and fatty acids. So glycerol is on the left, fatty acids are on the middle. When we add them together, we get a triglyceride. So these are put together in the same way that carbohydrates are, using dehydration synthesis. So we lose an H from one molecule and OH from another. Water is created and triglycerides are formed. So here we can see on the very far right, those 3 water molecules are formed from the H and OH molecules of the glycerol and the fatty acids to create a triglyceride. So they're formed when one glycerol molecule combines with 3 fatty acid molecules, so now they're known as triglycerides. In a triglyceride, the glycerol always has the same shape, but the combination of the fatty acids may differ. So they could be identical, or different, long or short, unsaturated or saturated. So we're now going to talk about saturated fatty acids. So these are predominantly animal fats, which means there's no double bonds between the carbon atoms. So every carbon has as many hydrogen atoms added onto it as it possibly can attach to. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature, like butter. And because they're only single bonds, this makes them very stable and hard to break down. So lard as well, animal fats. So again, because there's only single bonds, there's no double bonds, we cannot add any hydrogen to these fats. Now, unsaturated fatty acids are typically plant oil-based fats. So there'll be some double bonds between the different carbon atoms, which leaves room for hydrogen atoms to be added. So because there are these double bonds, they allow the fats to be liquid at room temperature. So sunflower oil, canola oil, olive oil. Margarine is a plant-based unsaturated fatty acid. However, it's often been hydrogenated, so they added hydrogen to it to make it solid at room temperature. So scientists take this unsaturated plant oil, they're going to heat it into a vapor. They're going to then add extra hydrogen molecules, which break apart the double bonds, converting them into saturated fats so that the margarine can be solid at room temperature. So the unfortunate thing was when we added hydrogen to these plant oils and cause them to turn into trans fats, which are very dangerous for our health and have now been eliminated in a lot of different products. So I'm not sure now how they create margarine, soft margarine, spreadable margarine, without any trans fats in them. But the food scientists did a lot more work to make spreadable margarine a more safe product. So phospholipids are a special type of lipid where the glycerol is bound to a phosphate group and two fatty acids. So the phospholipids are what makes up the lining of our cell membranes. So a phospholipid is a polar molecule, which means it has a charge associated with it. The polar end of the molecule is soluble in water because, again, water is a slightly polar molecule. And the nonpolar end is insoluble in water. So this makes them perfect for biological membranes. Okay. So here we have different descriptions of a phospholipid. We have the structural formula where we can see we have the hydrophilic end, the red circle. And this is the one that is soluble in water versus the hydrophobic cells, which are insoluble in water, the tails of it, to be said. Then we have the space filling model as well as the phospholipid symbol. So when you look at a cell membrane, you'll often see those circular balls with the tails attached to it. So fats are actually a very important part of our diet and should make up roughly 30% of our total food. This means caloric intake. So fats are very energy-rich macromolecule. So it doesn't mean that you need to eat actually a lot of fats in your diet because there's kind of a lot of bang for your buck in a smaller amount of fats. So they're very energy rich. Too much fat intake can cause many problems, such as obesity and heart disease due to fat buildup in your arteries, which we'll speak about right away. So cholesterol is a fat-like material in our blood. It is required to build and maintain cell membranes, and it's a main component in the production of our sex hormones, our estrogen and testosterone. So cholesterol is a necessary substance in our body. So our body does make its own cholesterol, but when you eat foods that have lots of fat or cholesterol, we can have too much buildup in our bloods. So cholesterol can build up on the inside of the blood vessels, and it's called ulterior atherosclerosis. And when too much cholesterol builds up, then blood cannot flow through our blood vessels. So when we look here at the atherosclerosis, we can see that we have a fatty buildup in the blood vessel, and it's going to impede the flow of red, white blood cells and plasma through that artery or vein. And so this is something that we want to avoid heart and circulatory system conditions. Now, not all cholesterol is bad for you. There are two types of cholesterol. So we have HDL, or high-density lipoprotein. This is known as good cholesterol. So HDL carries the bad cholesterol to the liver to be broken down. So most of this is made by our body and generally is pretty dependent on genetics. But there are some types of foods that are higher in HDL cholesterol compared to LDL, or low-density lipoprotein. So LDL cholesterol is called bad cholesterol. So about 70% of the cholesterol we get from food is LDL. So this is the kind that can stick to the walls of the arteries and eventually could clog them, which is a problem because if it stops our oxygen-carrying red blood cells from getting to tissues, we will have cell death, and this could happen in your heart, and then it would cause a heart attack. So this clog is known as plaque. So if a plaque occurs in the arteries delivering blood to the heart muscles or the brain, we can have a heart attack or a stroke. So our last macronutrient that we're going to talk about is proteins. So proteins are used to form the structural part of our cells. They build the structures of new cells and repair damage to old cells. And so, like I've said before, most of our body components are built up of protein. Our skin, our hair, our fingernails are all different forms of protein. So cytoplasmic organelles like the mitochondria and ribosomes are primarily made up of protein. Bones, muscles, tendons, nerves, skin, fingernails, and hair is also made up of protein, just in different forms. Enzymes, antibodies, and the components of blood are all made up of protein, so 80% of our body structure is protein. Proteins generally are not used as energy molecules because it takes a lot of energy for our body to break them down. However, our body will break down protein as its last resort for energy. But generally, our body chooses to use carbohydrates and fats first for forms of energy, and then use protein to build body components. So like other macromolecules, the proteins are made up of smaller subunits called amino acids, and they all contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but amino acids also contain nitrogen. So they have the same general structure. They have a central carbon, which is bonded to a hydrogen and 3 other groups, an amino acid group, a carboxyl group, and an R group, which is just 1 or more atoms that distinguishes the 20 different amino acids from each other. So R just stands for one of the other compounds that is bonded onto there, but we're not specifically discussing each one. So there are 20 different amino acids that make up all the known proteins. So we put them in different orders and different patterns and different amounts. And these 20 amino acids can be put together in a variety of lengths and orders, making up all the different proteins that bodies need to survive. So they can be short as a couple of amino acids in length or 250,000 amino acids in length. So there's a wide variety. And changing just one amino acid can change the entire structure and function of a protein. So if we look maybe at our fingernails, we can see that occasionally our fingernails will be, some people have long, strong fingernails, some people have weaker and softer fingernails. So this is a slight difference in the protein structure of individuals. So about 12 of the 20 amino acids human bodies can create, but the other 8 we must get from our diet. So they're called essential amino acids. If we don't get them in our diet, our bodies aren't able to function properly. So amino acids are again combined with dehydration synthesis. So a bond is going to form between the carboxyl group and the amino group of the next amino acid, and it's called a peptide bond. And again, water is released in this formation. So that peptide bond is in proteins, and when we have many proteins linked together, we know them, or many amino acids linked together, we know them as polypeptides. And polypeptides are able to twist and coil into complex three-dimensional shapes where we can have primary structures, secondary structures, quaternary structures, and they're very complex structures in the human body. So proteins are able to permanently alter their structure if exposed to heat, radiation, or a change in pH. So this could alter the shape and structure of a protein. If the protein uncoils and changes shape, it can't do what it was intended to do. And as well, often this could be permanent. So this could be called coagulation. So if you add heat to an egg, you have permanently changed the structure of those proteins. But if we just temporarily change the structure of a protein, it's called denaturation. So this would be if we change the pH of a protein, its structure changed, we put it back to the pH that it was intended to be in, and its structure went back to normal. So nucleic acids are what our DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid, are built from. So nucleic acids direct the growth and development of different organisms. It determines how a cell functions and what characteristics it has. So even though we have the same DNA in every cell of our body, the nucleic acids in our eye are sharing the I want to see, these are my rods and cones, part of the DNA, and the DNA in my skin says, I'm skin, this is what I should be doing, even though in every single cell of our body it's the same. So the nucleic acids also contain all the information needed to build proteins, but they have no real energy potential, so they're not used as an energy source in our body. So nucleic acids are formed by joining small subunits called nucleotides, and these are composed of a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate backbone, and a nitrogen-containing base, which gives the nucleotide its individual properties. And there are 4 different nucleotides which combine together to make all the DNA of all the living organisms on Earth. So we have cytosine and thymine, which are complementary pairs, as well as guanine and adenine. So lastly, important in our chemistry of life section is the vitamins and minerals. So vitamins and minerals are not macronutrients, so we don't generally need them in large amounts, and they have no energy value. But they're essential because they act as components of our body structure, so our bones and teeth, like calcium. In chemical reactions and nerve transmissions, we need sodium and potassium, and to maintain our water balance using our kidneys. And they also carry oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood, so for example, iron. And now there are certain vitamins and minerals that we need in our diet, and if we lack them, different diseases can develop. So if we have a lack of vitamin C, you have scurvy. Lack of vitamin K causes some blood clotting problems. Iron deficiency causes anemia. Magnesium deficiency may cause muscle cramping and muscle spasms. An iodine deficiency causes a goiter, which is a swelling on your neck. During pregnancy, a folic acid deficiency can cause spina bifida, or severe folic acid deficiency can cause encephalopathy. Vitamin D deficiency causes rickets. And now vitamin D is fortified in lots of baby formula and food here in North America. Same with folic acid, incidentally. And often young children and even adults take vitamin D supplements. And a vitamin B deficiency causes pellagra. And again, lots of our flours and grain products in North America are fortified with vitamin B, so we often don't see these vitamin deficient diseases in developed countries. Okay, well, that was our wrap up of the macro and micronutrients that our bodies need. And